Let me bring greetings from South Africa, from the city of Johannesburg. I'm pleased to be talking to people who are in the room. Let me just say that we've just had national elections in South Africa on Wednesday, and the counting is going on, so everyone is a bit anxious about the outcomes of the elections. But I am pleased to be here, and I believe that I'm talking to brothers and sisters from the union movement, and hopefully we could have a discussion after I've given my input. I did hear a little bit that I was introduced. I had my name mentioned. What I can say is that I am a unionist of many years, and I come not from ver.di, but I come from Metal of South Africa. I've been to Germany to meet colleagues in Metal over the 25 years I've been there. I'm not gonna say much about this because it's been said, but I've been a unionist going back to 1980. I am now a pensioner, retired from the South African Metal called NUMSA, National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa. And I am associated with the Global Labor University, which is a university for trade unionists all over the world. There is a campus in Kassel. There is also one in Berlin, one in South Africa, India, and Brazil. I've been asked to talk about the potential and challenges of international solidarity when it comes to sustainability. And I thought I would, in the main, share some of my experiences. What I thought I'll do is to talk about how, as trade unions, we've engaged with the question of environmental sustainability. That will be the first part of my talk. The second part will be to talk about the potential challenges of international work cooperation when it comes to sustainability in the world of work and as unions, and I would make some concluding remarks. Sustainability work within South Africa's labor movement, I would say, had two moments. There were two important moments. The first moment was in 2002, and this was around an event called the World Summit on Sustainable Development, which was held in Johannesburg, South Africa, as I said, in 2002. This was an important conference because it marked 10 years after the first Earth Summit, which was held in Rio. The second moment where unions got involved in discussions, in work around environmental issues, was when South Africa hosted the 17th Conference of Parties, or what is called COP17, which is the platform through which parties that are signatories to the convention meet on an annual basis. This was held in South Africa in 2011 and in a coastal city called Durban. Now, this is important to note these moments because as unionists, we used them, the two moments, to introduce within the labor movement issues about the environment, issues about climate change. And the fact that the country was hosting these provided an opportunity for us to talk to our members about issues of the environment. I'm not sure about your situation in Germany, but what I've learned throughout the years is that when there are major events, either at intergovernmental level, that provides a space to talk about issues which are sometimes non-issues in the union movement. Also important is for unionists is how disasters are also another opportunity to introduce issues which sometimes are pushed aside in the labor movement. But anyway, these were the two moments, and I think they are important because they revealed two approaches from the union movement. The first moment, which is in 2002. In 2000, sorry, in 2002, divisions emerged between unions and environmental groups. And if I recall, when there was a demonstration or a march in Johannesburg, the environmental groups had their own march and the unions had their own march. And the weeks of discussion about how to bring the two movements failed. And at the center of the disagreement, labor unions felt that the summit should focus on jobs and social issues. And they felt that what they called brown issues was what was important. Environmental groups, on the other hand, felt that the summit should be used to get governments to account for what had happened in the 10 years since the Rio Summit in 1992. So instead of the environmental groups and the unions coming together, they had a different and separate demonstrations. So this was where unions and environmental groups could not come together. The second moment was around the Conference of Parties in 2017. And what had happened in 2017 is that unions over time had become to develop a position that said that climate change was a trade union issue. And the Federation or the Trade Union Center, or if you call it in German, the DGB of South Africa, COSATU, around about 2009, had begun discussing climate change and how this was a workers' issue. And by the time the conference happened in South Africa, there was a understanding that amongst members or leading shop stewards about what climate change was all about. So what as unions we did was how we were gonna use the fact that South Africa was hosting this conference to generate interest amongst our members. I wouldn't say that luckily, fortunately, I wouldn't use those words, but we also had floods that occurred in December, between December and March 2011 in the region, and we could use this in education amongst our members to introduce the question of climate change. In my own union, which is a union that organizes in auto assembly, steel making, smelters, we had to find out how do we introduce the question of moving away from dirty fossil fuel industries, and also for people to recognize that climate change was an issue. And we had to get our union to shift from a belief that the South African economy will forever be dependent on fossil fuels, but that it will move to renewable energy sources. We also had a challenge of what happens when we have this shift, and how do we ensure that workers are not adversely affected, and that justice is at the center of the transition. We did three things, and now I'm talking about NUMSA. The first thing that we did was to assemble what we call the climate change champions in the union. We brought workers, about 22 of them, into what we called a research group, an energy research group. And these workers were from the sector that was going to be affected by the energy transition. We also made sure that workers in the renewable energy sector were involved in this team of climate change champions, and we ensured that we regularly report to union constitutional structures. So that's the first thing that we did. The second thing that we did was that we tried very hard to make the issue of climate a bargaining issue. And I would give two examples. The first one was that there were programs in the energy sector to save energy, or what are called energy efficiency programs. And what we did was to introduce in the collective bargaining clauses about if a company achieves these energy efficiency levels, how are the rewards and the benefits shared with workers? We have a system where if a company is able to save energy, electricity in this case, it is exempted from certain taxes, income and corporate taxes. So we had to negotiate how these savings were going to be shared with the workers in the form of bonuses and incentives for workers. The second thing that we did was to run a campaign because what was happening in South Africa is that there was a rising electricity tariffs, and these rising electricity tariffs were affecting our sector and leading to retrenchments. As you see in the picture, there was a year where electricity was to rise about 16%. And as you'll see the poster there, people were demanding inflation-related tariffs, not a 16% increase. And we ran this campaign throughout the country, and I would say that we were victorious, that the regulator, which is the body that sets electricity tariff increases, set the increases at the level of inflation increase. So that was the second thing that we did. We tried to make the issue of climate and energy a bargaining and a campaigning issue. The third thing that we did was to talk about the question of jobs and develop a nuanced position of jobs. We were clear that when the wind farms, the solar plants are completely built, there are no massive jobs in the operation of these plants. And we worked out a position that the jobs are in the manufacturing of components that goes into solar and wind installation. And we worked hard to negotiate what we call local content requirements, where we said that certain components in these equipments have to be produced in South African factories, and we were able to have the government introduce these regulations on and local content requirements. The third thing that we did was to see how we could use workers' pension funds for investment in renewable energy. So through these measures, we were able to have our union to talk about a transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy, to talk about just transition, and also to talk about sustainability. Now, once we were doing this as a union and the union movement in South Africa, we were cooperating with the global trade union movement, because the issues of the environment, the issues of climate are not issues that can be dealt with in Germany or in South Africa. An international effort is required. and we were clear that we needed to cooperate with the union movement globally. And the international body globally, which we were affiliated to, I took, um, did a lot of work, and through that work, it coined the concept of a just transition. And it went to many of the negotiations globally under the United Nations and said that the issue of a justice underpinning the transition from dirty energy, fossil fuels, to renewable energy, justice must underpin that. And over the years, I would say from 2015, we saw that in the United Nations documents, the question of a just transition became included. And I think that cooperation was in the main out of a belief that we must ensure that workers and their communities are not adversely affected, and that there must be a transition that is just, fair, and inclusive. Now, although climate change is a global issue, although the questions of the environment, biodiversity loss are global issues, we do know that regions in the world will be affected differently. Africa as a region will be adversely affected. We also know that different countries in the region will also be affected differently because they have different energy mixes, and that the concept of a just transition means different things to countries, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. So once we are quite clear about the need for cooperation, we're not oblivious to the fact that different regions are affected differently. And if we would talk about the African continent, we know that in the world there are about 800 million people who have got no access to clean forms of electricity, clean forms of energy. And about 500 million of those, about 500 million of those are in sub-Saharan Africa. And I'm saying this to brothers and sisters who are sitting in Germany, and where the issue of universal access to energy is something that was resolved many, many, many years ago. The fact of the matter is that in the African continent, this is an aspiration that millions of people still have to see fulfilled. Again, it is projected that by 2030, 1 in 2 people, that's close to half, will be dependent for cooking on polluting fuels. So once we talk about the transition, we have to also factor in a region like Africa issues of energy, poverty, that people are poor in terms of universal access to energy. And I think this, I'm putting this forward honestly, because if there's going to be any international cooperation, that international cooperation must be based on realities that exist in different regions and different continents. As the labor movement, we know that if you look at the problem of greenhouse gas emissions, carbon dioxide emissions, methane, all the gases that causes climate change, they are burning. A region like Africa, if you look at historical contribution, its contribution is about 1%. And if you look at their current contribution, is between 3 to 4%. So how do we forge cooperation as the labor movement internationally in ways that say that we have to tackle this together, but there are differences in terms of access to energy, energy poverty, and also that the contributions to the problems are unequal and uneven. And we also know that if you talk about infrastructure, the countries that will be severely affected by, let's say, climate change, will be those countries without the infrastructure. So these are things that we cannot run away from. Quickly, my view is that it will be important to go back to what was a founding principle in the start of the work amongst nations on sustainability, climate change. And this is the principle of common but differentiated responsibility. And this principle says that we have to work together, but the responsibilities of dealing with the problems may not be the same. Those who contributed and who have the resources to do so in solving the problem have to do more. The second thing is that the concept of a just transition, we will have to reclaim this concept so that it means something to union members and constituencies. The third thing about worker cooperation is that we should explore as unions whether there could be what I call a global just transition frameworks. As just transition as a concept has become mainstream, many companies across the world, many transnational corporations are adopting sustainability measures in terms of how they do business. Sometimes when they do this, they don't do it with labor. And if they do it with labor, they do it with labor and unions in the headquarters of the multinational corporations. And I think that as unions, it is important that we should think about global just transition frameworks or sustainability frameworks, which we can all contribute to as unions, both in the global north and in the global south. I think that there is a question that we need to talk about as international labor. Many, and maybe this had come up in the conference, for instance, the EU, the European Union, is in pursuit of its targets for cleaner energy sources, for its decarbonization targets. It's adopting what it calls carbon border adjustment mechanisms, CBAMs. And I think the cartoon in the slide raises the question of the way these carbon taxes are structured. How fair and just are they? Because 68 cars out of 100 that are manufactured by NUMSA members in South Africa are exported to the EU and North America. And with an economy that's dependent on coal, if we export these products and there are these carbon border adjustment mechanisms, what will that mean for exports coming from developed worlds? Now, this is a question that is the international labor movement we should discuss and find a way that's common to all of us. As I said, we have to revive the principle of common but differentiated responsibility. This is a principle that goes back to Rio in 1992, which argues that different countries, different players had different contributions to environmental degradation. And that we have a common, we must work together, but the responsibilities are differentiated. And I do think that if we're going to talk about cooperation internationally, this principle should be revived. The last thing, and to finish here, my view is that it is important that as labor, as unions, we should put the question of education of our members, raising consciousness of our members on issues of sustainability, of building a sustainable world at the center of our activities. And I do think that it is important to inject in the union movement a sense where we begin to think green, that when we're talking about how our workplaces are organized, this sustainability consciousness is something that our shop stewards, our members will put at the center. So that is where I want to leave it, and hopefully we could have some discussion and talk about it. Thank you very much.